Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar presented by Quimbee Bar Review. During today's presentation, we're going to be reviewing how to memorize effectively so that you can tackle the bar exam or any exam with confidence. We're going to get started here in just a minute to allow time for everybody to join us. When we do, we'll begin with an introduction from Brenly Pereira, a bar review director here at Quimbee, and then she'll dive right into our presentation for today. For the last 10 minutes or so, or however much time we have, we will be doing a live Q&A. So please be sure to submit any questions you have as you have them in the Q&A feature below, and either one of our Quimbee team members who are working in the background here will answer you directly, or will address it during that live Q&A. If we don't get to your question, don't worry, we will provide you with our contact information for you to reach out to us after the webinar. All right, with that, I'm going to flip things over to Brenly, who's going to get our webinar started today. Take it away, Brenly.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. So, like Emily said, my name is Brenly, and I'm a bar review director here at Quimbee. I've taken and passed the bar in two different jurisdictions, California and Indiana, and now I help students on their bar prep journey. So for today's agenda, after a really brief intro about Quimbee, we'll start off by talking about what the bar exam looks like, both the UBE and NextGen. If you're taking the bar in a jurisdiction that isn't UBE or NextGen, don't worry. The memorization information we cover is still going to apply to you. And you can always write into barprep@quimbee.com if you have questions specific to your jurisdiction. We'll then be talking about memorization for the bar exam, including how our brains work, how to help them memorize best, and a couple special techniques. Then at the end of the presentation, we'll have time for some live Q&A. But as Emily mentioned, you can also type your questions into the Q&A feature as we talk today, and one of my colleagues will get you an answer. Okay, so what is Quimbee? You're probably here because you know a little bit about us already. Most students have used our Quimbee study aids during law school. Today, when we touch on our products, we'll be talking primarily about Quimbee Bar Review, which helps you prep for the bar exam. Okay, so moving on, what is the bar exam? For the purpose of this little intro, we're going to be talking about the breakdown of the UBE because it is the bar exam most commonly used in the US. In fact, 41 jurisdictions have adopted the UBE. But if you're taking the bar in a different state, it's likely that your breakdown of the different exam components is pretty similar. And just so you know, here at Quimbee, we also have courses for the California bar exam and the Florida bar exam. So as far as exam components go, the UBE is comprised of three different parts. The multi-state bar exam, which we refer to as the MBE, multi-state essay exam, the MEE, and the multi-state performance test, the MPT. So the MBE, starting with that, that's the multiple choice portion of the bar exam. It's 200 multiple choice questions total, broken into two sessions of 3 hours each. You get 100 questions in 3 hours, unless you have time and accommodations, of course. There are 7 subjects tested on the MBE, and it's worth 50% of your score. Then you have the MEE portion of the bar exam, which is the essays. It's 6 essays. You get 30 minutes for each of them. And there are actually 12 subjects total that can be tested on the MEE, worth 30% of your score. And then finally, you have the MPT. The MPT is also part of the written portion of the bar exam. There are 2 MPTs total on the bar, and they're essentially closed universe writing assignments. So if that doesn't make sense, they give you a case file to use. It has all the facts that you need, as well as all of the law that you need to know. And then they assign you to do something pretty typical of what a first-year associate would normally be assigned. So, for example, writing a letter to your client, writing a memo for your boss, maybe you're drafting the legal argument portion of a brief your firm's going to submit to the court, etc., something like that. And together, these 2 MPTs are worth 20% of your score. If you're taking the bar exam next year or beyond, though, you may actually end up taking the NextGen bar exam. So NextGen is going to be the NCBE's new bar exam, kind of like the UBE 2.0. It's set to debut in a few jurisdictions in July 2026, and it's going to continue to be adopted by different jurisdictions from that point until July 2028. After July 2028, The UBE is going to be no more. It won't exist anymore. And all states are going to have to decide whether to adopt NextGen or basically to develop their own bar exam. So this map on the left here, that shows the states that have announced when they're adopting NextGen. So take a second and see what your jurisdiction is planning on. If the jurisdiction you plan on practicing is in gray, that means either they're not adopting NextGen or they just haven't decided yet. Some states have been very upfront about that, like California, for example. They're doing their own thing. But some of the others, we're not sure yet. We will see. Um, you can actually sign up for updates about NextGen on the NCBE website if you want to keep an eye on that, like if your jurisdiction is undecided. So before I move on and talk about the different portions of NextGen, we're just going to launch a quick poll for are you taking the UBE or NextGen? Or not sure yet, or in California, Florida, one of those states. Okay, so while you're answering that, as far as bar exam components go for NextGen, the pie chart on the right shows how the exam will be structured. Importantly, the pie chart we showed on the last slide, that was how much each portion counted percentage-wise for your overall score. This pie chart's a little bit different because it actually represents how much of the exam time you're going to be spending on each portion. The NCBE has not yet announced the relative weightings for exam grading yet. It might be this, or it might be adjusted slightly. We just don't know yet. But let me explain what those acronyms stand for. So MCQ stands for multiple choice questions. You probably could have guessed that. You're going to spend 40% of your overall testing time on multiple choice questions. And this multiple choice question portion, it's going to largely align with what we see on the MBE today. So you'll get a short hypo, and then you're asked to perform a legal analysis, typically choosing the best answer among 4 options. But these MCQs are going to vary in some ways. For example, they have said that on NextGen, some multiple choice questions will ask you to choose the best 2 answers among 6 options instead of just the best 1 among 4. But overall, it's going to be pretty predictable and pretty on par with the MBE. IQS, that stands for integrated question sets. You're going to spend a quarter of your testing time on IQSs. Each set will have a common fact scenario, as well as sometimes some other resources like statutes, case law, supplemental documents, that sort of thing. Then you use all of that information, the fact pattern plus whatever other resources they give you to answer a mix of multiple choice questions and short answer questions. Sometimes you're going to be asked to perform sort of like a wildcard type task, like drafting or editing a legal document. But most of the time it'll be, multiple choice and short answers. Then finally, you have PTs, that stands for performance tasks. About a third of your time will be spent on those performance tasks. They each take 60 minutes to complete. And honestly, they're a lot like the MPT that we have on the UBE today. It's a closed universe writing assignment. They have you do something that's pretty typical of a first year associate, but they give you everything you need to do it. The facts, the law, all of it. So they're very much like what we see on the MPT today. They're just going to be shorter, 60 minutes instead of 90. If you're curious about what all these testing types will look like on NextGen, you can actually find sample questions for each portion on the NCBE website. So that's always available if you would like. Okay, and let's move on. Actually, am I able to see the poll results? I don't think I'm seeing that.
Oh, I can
Maybe.
share those.
Yeah,
So
sure. Let's see really quick.
looks like the majority are either not sure or they're not in a UBE or next gen jurisdiction, and then majority are taking UBE. And looks like based on a couple comments, we got a lot of 3Ls, maybe people taking the bar exam already this year, but some planning for 2026 and beyond.
Okay, that's so helpful. Thank you. It's good to know who we're working with. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide, which is do you actually need to memorize for the bar exam? That probably seems like an obvious question. You're probably like, yeah, duh, of course you need to memorize for the bar exam. The answer is yes, but it might not be quite as much as you think, actually. So if you're one of those people who answered that you're taking the UBE, the need for memorization is a little bit higher than it'll be on NextGen, for example. So for the MBE, the multiple choice portion, you need to know the rules well enough to recognize when a rule is being raised, and then apply the law to the facts in a given fact pattern. So it's kind of like medium memorization is required there. For the MEE, the essay portion, you need to be able to actually regurgitate rule statements. So there's a high need for memorization. For the MPT, you don't need anything memorized. They give all of it to you. On NextGen, the overall need for memorization, a little bit lower. For the MCQs, it's the same deal as the MBE, right? You need medium memorization to be able to recognize when a rule is being called out and then know it well enough to apply it to the fact scenario they give you. For IQSs, you're sometimes going to be given the law you need, and sometimes you're not. You will have to have law memorized. But even when you do need it memorized, verbatim rules probably won't be required of you too often because the questions will always be a mix of multiple choice and short answer. So I would classify that also as medium memorization. And then for the performance tasks, which are essentially the same as MPTs, no memorization needed at all. So I don't want you walking away from this thinking you can just wing it on the bar exam and you don't need to memorize. You definitely still need to have some rules memorized, and you will need lots of practice to build your test taking skills. But I hope this provides a bit of comfort if you were feeling overwhelmed before you came to this webinar. All right, so now that we've established the need to memorize on the bar, how do you actually do it? I think part of it starts with understanding how our brains really work and how memory works. So our brains process information according to three distinct stages. Sensory memory, this is the first stage of information processing. Information from the environment around us enters our sensory memory through one of our five senses. Makes sense, right? Vision, hearing, smell, taste, or touch. If we slow down in the moment and pay attention to the information entering our sensory memory, we can shift that information into our working memory, which is the second stage, and create the potential for longer term storage, which is the third stage. But if we leave the information unattended in one ear out the other, it doesn't remain long, right? Sensory memory lasts milliseconds. Think of how hard it is to conjure up a smell after it passes. But when we do slow down and pay attention to information, it enters our working memory, also known as short-term memory. Working memory is the brain's scratch pad. It's where we do our conscious cognitive processing, including making decisions and solving problems. Working memory has limited capacity and retains information for still a short period of time, about 15 to 30 seconds. So it's longer than sensory memory, but it's still not super long, right? If we want to remember something later on, we need to shift it from that working memory stage to the long-term memory stage. Long-term memory has vast storage capacity, and it can hold information for days, months, or even years. On an exam, we retrieve information from that long-term memory and shift it back to working memory to perform the task that's being required of us. So on the bar, for example, your goal is often going to be pulling rules from your long-term memory back into your working memory so you can use them to complete the tasks at hand. The essay and multiple choice portions of the exam test your ability to apply rules to given factual scenarios, like we've talked about. You must be able to pull that rule from your memory to advance to the next step, which is applying it to the facts. If you can't recall the rule, you're probably not going to be able to reason to the right result. Although there are some strategies of what to do if you're stuck on the MEE and you feel like you can't remember a rule. And we'll talk a little bit about that later on, so don't stress too much. But in general, being able to pull rules from long-term memory into working memory is very critical to your success on the bar exam. So in order to get the law you need to know into your long-term memory to begin with, you need to focus on encoding. So what is effortful encoding? Many students spend the bulk of their bar prep time using passive strategies that take limited mental energy. So think of like reading outlines or reviewing notes or listening to lectures. Sometimes these strategies can feel good in the moment because they produce an illusion of knowing. But often studying in that passive way, usually it doesn't really take the rules into our long-term memory. Honestly, they often don't even make it past the sensory memory stage when you're just kind of sitting there acting as a sponge. The rules we hear or see on the page may seem familiar, so it can become easy to even tune out, and we think we've mastered them. But come exam day, we're not going to be able to recall them if you only studied using passive learning tactics. True memorization happens when we put effort into encoding information from our working memory into our long-term memory. We need to learn rules actively. It's not enough to receive them passively from an outline or a lecture. There are actually many ways that you can employ active learning during your bar prep. So, for example, you can create and use flashcards. You can teach the rules to somebody else. That might sound silly, but even if you only have your dog next to you, you can try to explain this is how this works in the real world. That really helps with memorization. Same with brainstorming a factual example that fits a rule you just learned. Takes a lot of effort, and sometimes you'll be like, that's not worth the time, but it is because it helps that information stick in your brain better. There's also rules drill sheets, which are essentially kind of like the little graphic you see here. If you want to study torts, you can list out, sub names of subtopics for the most commonly tested torts areas, right? And then the exercise is you sit down and you try to write out as many rule statements as you can remember. Even if you can't do it very well and you have to turn to the outline or a video or something like that to fill in what you've missed, that is going to be effortful and that will help you encode better. Finally, practice questions. We're going to talk about this later, but practice questions are a huge tool that you can use just on a day-to-day basis to memorize. There are also some special techniques you can employ, which is what we're going to talk about next. All right, so first off, you have mnemonics. We are going to launch another poll here. While I start talking about mnemonics, I want you to answer what subject is this mnemonic for? What subject's being tested here? What's it trying to help you remember? Okay, so mnemonics are built by associating new information with an accessible mental cue, such as a word or a song. For example, acrostic mnemonics, this one that I have on the slide, this is called a name mnemonic, and we're going to come back to it after you've answered the poll. But for acrostic mnemonics, you use the first letter of each word to form a memorable phrase or sentence. So, for example, the felony murder rule is a part of crim law that gets tested fairly often on the bar exam. Most jurisdictions limit the application of felony murder to inherently dangerous felonies. So, crimes that by their nature pose a high risk of injury or death, usually robbery, rape, arson, kidnapping, and burglary. There's kind of a popular acrostic mnemonic that you can use to help memorize those 5 inherently dangerous felonies, and that is ravenous rob, 8 Keith's burger. Robbery, rape, arson, kidnapping, burglary. Sometimes kind of silly, but it works. Okay, Emily, do we have a clear winner among the poll for what nachos is helping you remember?
Yes, we have, looks like 77% say real property.
Great work, guys. It's true. This is a popular mnemonic used for the adverse possession rule in real property. So you can see it here, but N is for notorious, A for actual, C for continuous, H for hostile, O for open, and S for sole possessor or exclusive possession. If the other 33% of you haven't taken property yet, you're forgiven. But adverse possession, I feel like, is one of those ones where you have so many elements to remember. So using stuff like that can definitely help. So there are some bar review courses out there that really hit heavy with the mnemonics to help with memorization. Transparently, we don't do that a ton here at Quimbee because learning science actually shows that mnemonics are much more effective if you generate them yourself. If you're using somebody else's mnemonics, it can feel like you have two separate things to remember, the mnemonic itself and the rule, which isn't really that helpful. But if you create your own, that's more encoding, and it's actually more likely to be accessible to you later on because it's something that your own brain thought of. So if you do find mnemonics helpful, create as many as you want. All right, so next you can also try a memory palace, which is kind of a place in your mind where you store images. To use this method, you place images along a familiar journey. Then you can associate the concepts you want to remember with landmarks that are featured on that route. The more familiar the route and the more vivid the associations will be, and the better you will remember. This might sound kind of weird with me. That might sound kind of weird at first, but please just bear with me. I think you'll see that it can be helpful. So let's pretend that you frequently walk by a speed limit sign on your way to the law library. You can use this route to remember negligence per se. Negligence per se requires that the law articulate a mandatory specific command, like the speed limit sign. You can see first there. Then you can map the remaining elements of negligence per se onto other law landmarks you pass on the route. So the window to your criminal law classroom could help you remember that the law must impose a criminal penalty, for example. Then classmates entering the door could help you remember that the victim must be in the class of persons the law was designed to protect. That's your third element. And then finally, for your fourth element, a friend you see on a bench typing on her computer could help you remember that the law must be intended to prevent the type of accident that occurred. Like I said, this one may seem unnatural until you actually try it, but I think you'd be surprised by how effective it can be. When we give our brains more associations to work with, active recall happens much more smoothly. Another option that you have is mind maps. So mind maps are visual diagrams that cluster related concepts together. You start off by putting the most basic idea in the center of a page, and then you create branches using the major subtopics. From those subtopics, you continue clustering information outward towards the margins of the page. So for example, as you can see here, contract law, that branches into several major subtopics. Source of governing law, contract formation, defenses to enforceability, contract content and meaning, performance breach discharge, remedies, and then third-party beneficiaries. From there, you can continue branching from those major subtopics. So for example, if you were working on this mind map, next to contract formation, you could write offer, consent, consideration, offer, consent, consideration, and then write the rule statements for each of those specific subtopics. You can continue adding detail to the map, clustering related concepts together. Mind maps are helpful because they organize information in related clusters, which actually echoes how our brains naturally encode information. Mind maps also give you a framework to support learning. Bar prep requires learning not only the basic core of each subject, but also exceptions and more obscure rules. They don't always get tested, but they do sometimes. So some of them you are going to have to memorize. You can assimilate the information faster and remember it better if you can fit this minutia into categories in your brain. So far we've covered some sort of extraneous memorization tactics, like something you would do outside of the tasks you're assigned to complete day by day in a Barbie course. But there is a huge goldmine hidden in plain sight in your daily assigned tasks, and that is practice quizzes and essays. For example, here at Quimbee, our course is really practice-based because we know that you will start to naturally memorize even when you're not trying if you're repeatedly taking practice questions and writing practice essays. In our UBU course, we assign you to complete nearly 3,600 practice multiple choice questions and 150 practice essays. One tip I give students using our course is to utilize our question bank for memorization sessions, particularly if you find that your learning style, you learn best by doing. Our question bank allows you to filter through all the multiple choice questions in the course by specific subjects and subtopics. So if you know that you have a particular weakness, you can filter for questions that test you on that specific subtopic. And then you can just drill through as many multiple choice questions you need until you feel like it's starting to click. Even if you aren't using Quimbee, most bar prep courses have a feature similar to this. So look around, see if you can find one. You can reach out to somebody and ask too. Essay prompts, those are also extremely helpful for memorization. Writing an essay requires more time and effort than answering a multiple choice question, so it's actually a great opportunity to encode those concepts into your long-term memory. I often get questions from students about whether they should be completing essays closed book or, if it's okay to use your notes. Obviously, you don't want to be relying on your notes or outlines the entire time you study because you're not going to have those on exam day, and you don't want to create panic for yourself if you don't have something to lean on. But if you're at the beginning of a subject block, at the beginning of your studying journey, and you can't remember a rule, sometimes it's worth it to crack open your notes or outlines and go from there. If you're still going through the motions and writing that essay using the rules, even if you didn't remember them on your own, you're giving your brain the chance to encode. Writing it out, even if you didn't remember it, like that's how you're going to remember it later on. That's a much better use of time than throwing your hands up in frustration, skimming the model rule, and moving on. That's one of the most common things I see among students when they don't feel confident in something. They just say, "Oh man," and they move on. It's really useful to still go through the motions. If you're using our course and end up working through all the multiple choice questions and all the essays assigned to you, first of all, I would be impressed. There are a lot of them. But second, you can find even more in our course materials section, so you're never going to be at a loss for more practice opportunities. When should you memorize? So here at Quimbee, we typically recommend starting to incorporate memorization sessions into your regular practice a little less than halfway through the course. So, for example, we cover all the MBE subjects first, and then we'll do MEE subjects in the second half of the course. In between those two, we give you a simulated MBE where, you're basically sitting down and taking practice multiple choice sessions. That's around that time, that's when we say, okay, you should start incorporating memorization sessions. Before that time, it's okay to just be taking it all in. When you start isn't as important as how often you work in memorization sessions. So once you decide, okay, I'm ready, I'm going to start working through memorization sessions, the key is that you don't want to be cramming right at the end of your studying journey, right? You want spaced repetition. Cramming is not compatible with the way our brains work, and it's not going to help you succeed on the bar. So no matter when you actually start memorizing, space it out and keep it short. Memorization sessions should usually take between 30 and 45 minutes on average. Too much longer and your brain hits its capacity, and then you're just wasting time, which is not what you want to do. So remember, when I say memorization session, I mean using any of the memorization techniques we've talked about. That could be flashcards, could be mnemonics, practice multiple choice questions targeting one area of law, mind maps, mind palaces. Depending on what bar review course you use, it may or may not formally assign you to complete memorization sessions. So just keep in mind, keep an eye out for that. If you're not assigned to use memorization sessions, just remember to incorporate that on your own into your schedule every now and again. Okay, and now that we've talked about when you should start memorizing, what should you memorize? There is so much that could theoretically be tested on the bar exam that it understandably makes it overwhelming to think about memorizing it all. So it's important to have realistic expectations regarding what you need to memorize. First of all, you can't memorize everything. It's just impossible. It's nice to accept that from the very beginning. But when you decide, okay, I'm going to start memorizing, first you can prioritize based on topic weightings. So the NCBE is very consistent in what they test most heavily on the MBE. For example, individual rights as a subtopic of constitutional law, that's the #1 most heavily tested topic on the MBE and has been for several years. Constitutional rights of protected persons, that comes second. Negligence is third, so on and so forth. You can always rely on a lot of questions testing those topics, so it's in your best interest to make sure you have rules memorized for them. The NCBE is a little less predictable when it comes to the essay portion of the exam, but honestly, even there are some subjects that come up more frequently than others, like business associations and wills and trusts. If you start by prioritizing memorization on the most heavily tested, topics, subtopics of each MBE and MEE subjects, that will put you in a good position. Here at Quimbee, in order to help you do that, we add highly tested, moderately tested, and rarely tested flags to each subtopic in our written outlines, so that way you know what you should prioritize. We've also designed our course to naturally focus more heavily on the things that are tested more. So for example, more videos dedicated to those areas, more practice questions. Second, you can prioritize based on your personal performance. So I have to emphasize here that there are some risks associated with this approach. It's smart to spend a little more time memorizing in areas you're struggling with so that you can get up to speed, but the danger is that many students often end up overcompensating, and then they spend way too much time on something that's not going to make a huge difference in their overall score, and that tends to come at the expense of time they could have spent staying up to speed on everything else. If you feel like you can keep your expectations reasonable and not fall into that trap, then here's what I would do. First of all, I would keep an eye on how you're doing in the different subjects. In our Quimbee course, we have a multiple choice question performance report that actually keeps a running tab for you. That performance report breaks down your scores not just by the different subjects, but also by the subtopics of each of those subjects. And then it ranks those subtopics by how frequently they're tested on the MBE. That way, you see everything in one place. You see what's going to matter the most to your score, and you also see how you're doing in all of that. If you're scoring poorly on something that's like number 25 on the list of most tested, then yeah, maybe do a short memorization session, but don't harp on it too much. That's not going to be a huge thing in your score. But if negligence is your weak spot, which you'll remember negligence is number 3 most tested, I would pay a little more attention to that. Even with something highly tested, though, it's never a good idea to focus only on that in your studies, but it's definitely worth a couple more memorization sessions. So, a couple final tips to help you with memorizing. First, get enough sleep. I think sometimes law students think they're invincible, but you're not. Sleep actually plays a really vital role in memory consolidation. When you sleep, your brain has the chance to link everything together and make sense of it. But also, if you're sleep deprived, you just won't be able to focus. And if you can't focus, then the encoding just isn't going to happen. Same goes with nutrition and exercise. As much as you're able to, take the time to take care of your body so your brain can function at the level you need it to. Second, you're going to want to rotate the subjects you focus on. We talked about this in the last slide, but if you're lagging behind in evidence, you might find it tempting to do an evidence memorization session every day for a full week. That's not helpful though. It's akin to cramming, and you will end up neglecting other subjects. Try doing a different subject every time you sit down for a memorization session, whether that's, 2 or 3 times a week. You'll end up cycling back through all the subjects, which is obviously a good thing to do. Third, make it social. Memorization is pretty much the only part of bar prep that you can do with other people, particularly people who aren't studying for the bar too. So if you have a roommate or a partner or a parent or a friend who's willing, have them help you test yourself with flashcards. Explain the rules to them as you go because that helps even more with encoding. Fourth, don't put too much pressure on yourself too early on. You need time just to kind of get in the swing of things to create the scaffolding of your bar prep journey. And if you start memorization sessions too early, it's much more likely that you'll get overwhelmed and discouraged. Plus, it's helpful to have some practice questions, which are those natural memorization opportunities under your belt before you go into more formalized sessions. And in terms of Quimbee Bar Prep, those months of hard work leading up to the big day, at Quimbee, we do offer a bar review course to help prepare you for the bar exam. We support all UBE jurisdictions plus California and Florida. Some of our Bar Review Plus course features include using proven learning science to develop our materials. Learning theory is truly at the core of our mission, which is why you've loved our study aid so much. You're going to love the Bar Review course too. One of the ways that we incorporate learning science is through our illustrated lesson videos, which are definitely the most distinctive part of Quimbee, right? Our Quimbee cartoons. They're all 5 to 7 minute bar-specific videos. We also have strategy videos in there to help you think about how you're going to take the bar. We also take a practice-based approach to bar prep with plenty of practice questions from past bar exams incorporated through full-length diagnostic exams, practice essays, performance tests, and unlimited graded essays to help improve your writing performance over time. So just a quick plug before we get to questions. If you do want to check out Quimbee Bar Review, you can schedule a consultation of the course by scanning this QR code. That'll allow you to select a time for either myself or one of my colleagues to log on to a course, walk you through the program. That way you can see the course for yourself and ask any questions you have. If you know already that you want to enroll, just go directly to our website. There's a bar review tab there. Our full-time course starts May 16th, so it is a really good time to look into it. And then if you have questions, but you're not the type of person who wants to schedule a call, I get that. I was that person too. You can also email us at barprep@quimbee.com. You might even qualify for some discounts, so it's always worth it to send us an email and we can give you information about that. We've been really proud to help many students through the bar exam. This is just a small snapshot of some of the feedback students have given who used our course to help pass the exam. We have a lot more reviews on our website as well if you want to check them out. And I actually personally used Quimbee Bar Review to prepare for the UBE, which I took in Indiana last February and passed. So if you have any questions about my personal experience there, I would be super happy to answer them. And with that, I will turn it back over to Emily for the Q&A portion.
Awesome. Thank you, Brenly. As you said, we're going to answer your questions here now. If you have one, please put it in the Q&A feature, and we might respond to you directly, or we'll try to respond live. If we're not able to get to your question, we'll put that contact information up again before the end, and you can always reach out to us. Just click around quimbee.com and you can find that contact information. Okay, I'm going to start with the quite a few questions that we received when you guys registered. The first one I have here is someone asking, are handwritten flashcards better than virtual flashcards?
Okay, so there is some evidence to suggest that handwriting information that you need to memorize enhances memory better than typing does. I think that has to do with the effortful encoding process we talked about earlier. You know, the more effort you put in, the more that information just becomes a part of your long-term memory. So all in all, creating your own handwritten flashcards is likely to going to, that's probably going to be the most helpful in assisting your memory. But that being said, virtual flashcards are still better than nothing, right? So if you find yourself wanting to drill with flashcards and you don't have the time or the energy to sit down and handwrite some, please don't give up on the concept altogether. In our course, we have, I think it's 30 flashcards per subject. Lots of our review courses also have virtual flashcards that you can use if you want.
Awesome. Second question I have is, how do you memorize all the rules? There is so much material.
Definitely true. So I think I said this in the presentation, but there's a real strength in just accepting right off the bat that that's not going to happen. Your brain can't hold all of the rules that could theoretically be tested on the bar, because there's a whole world of things that could theoretically be tested on the bar. But that being said, there is data for what actually gets tested on the bar. So I would put some stock in that. You know, you can start off by prioritizing memorizing topics that are the most highly tested. If you have time, you can move on to moderately tested topics. And then you can move on to rarely tested if you still have time after that. And keep in mind that a lot of that memorization comes naturally when you're just studying. So, when you're thinking about what your bar review course is going to assign you to do versus the outside memorization work, remember that the stuff your bar review course assigns you to do is going to help with memorization in the first place. And the memorization techniques we talked about today, that's just kind of like an add-on if you feel like you need it. But that being said, sorry, this is going to get a little long, but I think it's important to say you will end up being tested on things that didn't quite make it into your long-term memory. That is okay. It happens to everyone on the bar exam. And that's why it's really important to practice what to do when you can't remember a rule while you're studying. So on the MBE, it's a little easier, right? Because if you truly have no idea, you can just pick an answer, bubble it in, and move on. But the MEE, it's a little bit trickier because if you can't remember the rule, often that can cause some panic, right? You can say like, "Oh, I don't know this rule. I'm not going to get a good grade on this essay." Sometimes students will even skip an essay when that happens. That's not a good idea. Um, on the MEE, you really want to be fighting for every single point you can get, and you would be surprised by how many points you can get when you don't know a rule. So here's the best approach. Usually an MEE question, or an MEE essay prompt, it's gonna have like 2 or 3 questions baked into it, right? They give you a fact pattern and then they give you a couple different questions to answer. If, for example, you remember the rule for one of them, but not the other two, start off with the ones that you know. Often when we're working on something we feel more confident in, it helps boost our overall confidence. And then that overall confidence assists our brains at pulling the rules from long-term memory to short-term memory. So like I know that sounds crazy, but sometimes once you have gotten through the things that you actually know, it helps you realize, oh, I do know this rule. I just was panicked in the moment, right? your brain needs time to calm down before you can realize, I do know this. This is also a good approach because it's really normal on the MEE when you come across something that you're not confident in to spend more time on it. You think like, oh, I don't know this, and they're going to be able to tell that I don't know this. I need to spend a lot of time making up something that's good. But then you end up sacrificing time on areas of law that you were more comfortable in and could have gotten more points in. So that's why you want to start with what you know and then circle back to what you don't know. And that way you're spending an appropriate amount of time on it. But finally, if you truly can't remember the rule at the end of the day, it's not the end of the world. You can actually create one. You can logic your way through, like, okay, what sort of rule do I think would be fair in this situation? The bulk of the points on the MEE actually come from your analysis skills. So if you're using an incorrect rule, but you still demonstrate that you know how to apply a rule to the facts, you're still going to get points for that. And often this is kind of funny, but students often find when they take that approach that the rule that they created isn't that far off from the real rule. You know, the law should be logical and fair. So if you're coming up with something that sounds logical and fair to you, sometimes you're close. So anyway, sorry, that was a very long answer, but accept that you can't memorize everything and also prepare for situations where you're not going to remember because that will happen.
Great. Thank you, Brenly. No, I think that's great because I think this next question is kind of related. Someone is asking, how do you memorize differently for the MBE versus the MEE?
Oh, that is a really good segue from the last question. Okay, so on the MBE, you just need to know a rule well enough that you can recognize it's being tested, and then you can quickly work your way through applying that rule to the facts in the fact pattern. It takes a little less recall power because you're not being asked to proactively articulate the rule. On the MEE, on the other hand, you do have to proactively articulate a rule. Typically, it's easiest to do this when you have the rules memorized verbatim, because if you can just quickly spit it out, then you can move on to the analysis, which is like we talked about, that's where the bulk of the points are going to come in. But I mean, like we talked about, our brains can only have so many rules memorized verbatim. It's a lot more natural to basically remember just like the gist of a rule. So if that happens, that's okay. It'll take you a couple extra seconds to, you know, basically from that gist of the role to articulate something that makes sense. But that's probably going to take you only a couple extra seconds. You'll still have plenty of time for analysis. And the graders, for the most part, are not looking for like specific buzzwords. They just want to see that you know how to basically articulate the role and they want to see you analyze. So, again, on the MEE, it's all about fighting for every little point you can. So don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. If you come upon an essay prompt that tests rules you're unfamiliar with during your studying process, go through the motions. Say, what would I do if I encountered this on the exam itself? And then you're not completely panicked when that happens on exam day.
Thank you. Okay, next question here. And if you have more, please continue to put them in the Q&A. I know we're getting a lot. We're going to answer as many as we can here over the next few minutes, and then we'll wrap up. Someone is asking, do different memorization techniques work better for people with different learning styles?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm really glad that got asked. So there are lots of commonalities between how our brains encode information. And there are techniques that work pretty well across the board, but the truth is that we all have our own unique learning styles. Our brains are all very different. So it's important to pay attention to your learning style and to respect it. If mnemonics don't do it for you, for example, that's fine. Don't waste your time with them. But on the other hand, if you found that like making and using flashcards was really helpful for you during law school, then it's probably going to be helpful for you on the bar too. So go ahead and, spend some time doing that. If you're not sure at this point what your learning style is, that's totally okay. I would play around with the different techniques that we talked about today. See what works for you. And you don't have to stick to just one, obviously. You can use a couple different techniques. If you like all of them, you can use all of them. Whatever will help keep it fresh for you.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, so next question we have. Someone's asking, how do you remember rules for cases on the bar exam?
Oh, this one is an easy answer, and it's also a happy answer. Um, you don't actually need to know case law on the bar exam. Sometimes, if you look at those like NCBE model essay answers for the MEE prompts, when you're looking at past essay prompts, they do list case law, but they don't actually expect you to do that on the bar exam. So you just need to know the legal principles and how to apply them. So that should help alleviate some pressure.
Great. Okay, I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions. Um, Next one might be helpful for anybody. Someone's asking, they work full time. Are there any useful tips for studying? I imagine these tips may be anything for anyone with a busy schedule that you could share.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you have a lot of competing responsibilities, the strongest recommendation is to use a part-time course. Like here at Quimbee, for example, we have a 6-month course that spreads the material out over a much longer period of time. It's, designed for working people, people with families. But obviously, if you're taking July, it's too late to start a 6-month course. There are still things that you can do. First thing is breaking your studying up into small chunks throughout the day instead of just leaving one giant studying block after you finish your work. That's really helpful. So, get up early, study for an hour or two before you go to work, study 30 minutes on your lunch break. Sometimes, if your job allows, do quick studying sessions in between meetings or in between, natural breaks at your workday. Um, it's also, this is counterintuitive because you only have so much time, but it's really crucial to plan in breaks for yourself as well. You could probably spend every single second of your free time studying, and if your job is truly full time, like you still might not get through everything in the course. So it's tempting to just say, I need to study, I need to study, I need to study, but you will burn out really quickly if you do that. And then you'll feel discouraged on top of feeling tired. So when you create your schedule for the week, I really encourage you to plan in some breaks for yourself where you can do something that helps truly rejuvenate you.
Great. Okay, I'm going to get in one last question here. We have from someone who's going to be taking the bar exam for a second time, and they're asking, how do they create a core list of the most needed rules?
Right, that's a good question. So we touched on this a little bit during the presentation, but I would really encourage you to do your research on what gets tested most heavily. So I've talked about our quick lines and our outlines here at Quimby, which have those highly tested, moderately tested, rarely tested flags. We also have an MEE subject frequency chart, which explains what subjects have been tested most heavily on the essays. And finally, we have that multiple choice question performance report, which ranks all of the topics by testing frequency and shows you how you're doing in them. So there are lots of places to look for help with that. If you aren't using Quimbee, of course, I'd encourage you to reach out to your bar prep provider, see if they provide something similar. There's also some information just floating around online. You'll want to verify it, of course, but there are definitely lots of places where you can look to see, okay, what gets tested most heavily.
All right. Well, thank you, Brenly. That was a lot of great information, but we've hit well past our time. So with that, we're going to wrap up the webinar here. Thank you to everybody for joining us today. If you have any further questions, I've put our contact information back up on the screen. We'll be posting the recording of this webinar on the resources section of quimbee.com and emailing it out to you by early next week. So you can also watch it back there, share it with a friend if they want to watch it as well. And again, reach out to us anytime if we did not get to your question. We will respond to any questions sent to our barprep@quimbee.com email within 2 business days. But we hope you have a great rest of your day and best of luck preparing for the bar exam.